Hey everybody, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today, I'm really excited about this one, is the man, the myth, the legend, the Mitch Matthews. He hosts the Dream Think Do podcast. He's a public speaker, a coach. He runs the Coach Mindset. He's been a longtime friend, longtime supporter, and also a great mentor to me in my life for several years now, someone I really look up to, and also just an example of someone who's doing it right. And also on top of all that, he uses a lot of fun words, and he's a real fun guy to hang out with. So I'm really excited for this one. Mitch, great to have you, man.
Chandler is a true honor, buddy. This is true awesome sauce is what it is.
I'm glad to have you, and I think people are going to get a lot out of this interview, because in this we're really going to dive into the worry side and the doubt and the mindset, because when you start writing a book, there's a lot of things that creep up. And we were talking about these stats before this interview, the stats that 81% of people, according to a New York Times study, 81% of people want to write a book. Only 1% of people actually do, less than 1%. So it's a crazy number, a crazy disparity there between the people that want to and the people that actually do it. And a big reason for that is right here. Right? We tell ourselves that we can't. And so what I want to start out with is, you do a lot of work on this. You even have a speech on this and a book coming out on this, of punching worry in the face. So start us out with, what are some of these worries that you see, whether it can be a book, we'll relate it back to that, but what are some of the worries that you see with some of your clients as they're approaching projects like this?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, to your point, I think that, with our podcast, I've got a Dream, Think, Do podcast, which we're all about helping people dream bigger, think better, and do more. And we always try to, tie that back to science. How do you think better? And because so often the things that are getting in our way of us achieving those dreams or goals is not necessarily circumstance. I mean, circumstance can definitely slow us down. It can be, obstructions along the way, but it's generally, as to your point, it's our thinking that does it. And as we were getting ready for this conversation, I was just thinking about that statistic that you point to, just that huge disparity between the number of people who want to write a book, who need to write a book. I mean, there's so many people out there who've got great books in them, and they sit in their minds, they sit in their notebooks, never to be seen, right? It's a tragedy. And I thought about that, and I thought, sometimes people would think, well, it's money. Or sometimes people think it's time. But really, if you boil all of those things down, at the heart of that is worry, right? It's not so much money. I mean, you've seen people who have been able to achieve amazing things, like the Wright brothers. They built that first airplane on zero budget, right? If you know why you're doing something, you will figure out a way to get it done, no matter what the money is, right? It's usually, is this going to be worth me? Is it going to be worth me doing it? Will I lose money on this if I go and spend time writing a book and nothing happens? Or will it be worth my time? It's all those things. When you think about it, worry is at the heart of all those things. Not just to mention, and for anybody who's ever published a book, one of the biggest things, like the night before you go to publish, right? This, everybody who's done this, like that your heart's just racing, not to say, part of it's, will it be successful? Part of it, will it be well liked? All that stuff. But you're like, what are people going to say? Oh my God, a bad review is going to come at some point, or maybe many bad reviews are going to come no matter how many people love it. You're like, and so that worry can just kill us. And so that's why so many people never hit publish. They've got either books in them or books ready, and they never take that final step. And worries at the heart of all of that. And worries at the heart of so many things. I mean, talk statistics, 85%, like a Family Practice Association released a statistic recently that says 85% of all family practice visits are actually related to stress. It's like, holy crap. I mean, we're all impacted by worry. And so, especially when it comes to creating content, we got to go after this worry thing. And that's where I see it. I see it myself. I see it in so many other people. If you don't address worry, so many of our best ideas get shut down and they never see the light of day. So that's why I was excited to be able to talk about this with you today.
Great. And I love, as you were running through all that, what would you say is for people, like, because I feel like worry, it wears a cape, it wears a mask, and it's got many disguises. So what are those types of worry that most people experience? And then what are the capes that it hides under?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I love it. And I think to that point, that's in my book, I talk about 3 steps of overcoming worry, really punching it in the face, right? And that first step is acknowledging worry, because it's one of those things that it does creep up on us. It sneaks up on us. For some people, it's one of those things we don't even realize it has kind of overtaken us. You think about it, like the basic, if you get to the root of worry, actually some of the root of worry is good, right? Our bodies are amazingly designed. I mean, you think about all the amazing things that happens in our body on a regular basis. It's absolutely incredible, right? And some of the core things rooted to worry are good for us, right? So if you and I weren't in San Diego and Iowa today, but we were magically transported to the plains of the Serengeti, right? And we're walking along hand in hand on the plains of the Serengeti. Maybe not hand in hand, that'd be too weird, right? But on the hill, right, we'd see this pride of lions start to creep up, right? And they start to look hungry. Our body would start to worry. Our body would start to stress, and it would start to react in that fight or flight kind of thing. And that's a good thing, right? We want our heart to pump. We want the adrenaline to race. We want all of those things because that's going to help us either run away or fight, right? And we used to live in Montana, so we did a lot of hiking in bear country. And a very wise guide once told us that you don't have to be the fastest person when you hike in grizzly country. You just have to be faster than one person you're hiking with. That's just a tip. That's free tip. That'll sink in for some people later, right? So here's the thing, like that's good. That fight or flight is good in those situations where we actually have to worry about ourselves, our personal safety. The problem is that with worry, that starts to sneak in and become a prolonged thing. It starts to become chronic. And that actually starts to have all sorts of negative effects. I mean, it's one of those where the very things that make our heart race when we want to outrun lions and tigers and bears are the things that cause heart disease, hypertension, all those things. Now, some people are like, I wasn't worried before, but now after hearing Mitch, I am worried. Sorry. But it's something we have to pay attention to. But the other thing that's amazing about worry is that in a fight or flight reaction, our body, our mind does a lot of things, right? It starts to cue up all those protective things that we do. But one of the things that it does is it actually limits our ocular nerve. Okay, I always love talking science just for a little bit, but right, it actually narrows our focus and what our eyes actually see. I mean, you can only guess at why that is, but my guess is that we're either looking for where we're going to punch or where we're going to run, right? We actually see less. Now, what's interesting about that is we also see that kind of metaphorically, we actually see less options visually, but also mentally. As we start to think through options, we see less options. Now, nothing could be worse for our creativity, right? I mean, for a person who's going to sit down and start writing, if they're in fight or flight mode, and maybe they're not even aware that they are, they actually see less options. They're going to be less creative as they're writing. So it's kind of one more reason to acknowledge this kind of thing that's happening within us, whether it's those voices that start to creep in saying, I don't have the know-how on how to upload this to Amazon, let alone do a cover. Or I don't know whether people really need to hear this message. Or, oh my gosh, what if people leave negative reviews? Or what if my family reads this and we have to have that awkward moment where Uncle Steve doesn't get what I wrote, and he maybe makes fun of me at Christmas dinner or whatever. Like all these things are playing out, right? And your body, even though you're not outrunning a lion or a tiger or a bear, your body's moving into fight or flight mode, seeing less options, and actually doing less and less of your best thinking. So it is really important to acknowledge it and identify it and say, what are some of those things? Are you worried about some of the technical aspects of this whole process? Are you worried about the creative process? Are you worried about how well it'll be received? All those things, to just acknowledge what are some of those things and not say forget about them, because forgetting about it doesn't work. To say, oh, that doesn't exist. That's a little bit like trying to fall asleep early on Christmas Eve, just to try to make Christmas morning come that much faster. I don't know if anybody ever told you that, it's kind of that, or if somebody who's not a worrier, oftentimes their first suggestion will be, don't worry about it, right? Those things, that doesn't work. So first is to acknowledge it. What are some of those things that are causing you worry? Some of those things might be real, but most of the time they're more imagined. Like, we don't know. I mean, every time I go to publish a book, I have those worries of terrible reviews, and some will always come through. You experience that too. Most of them are not well-grounded, and some people are just grumpy, right? So you just know that they're going to come. But at the same time, to be able to say, okay, how does that really impact me, right? A lot of times that kind of worry is more, we just have to acknowledge it's there. It's probably not as real as we might imagine, but just to acknowledge it. But then again, the second step in this process is to not forget about it. It's to replace it. And we can talk more about that too, how authors might do that or how people might do it in general. But first step is to acknowledge it. Second step is to replace it.
And let's dive into that a bit more. Like, what are those worries, and what do you see those worries being for authors, and how do you recognize those?
Absolutely. So, part of it is to just kind of take a little bit of an inventory on what are you concerned about? Is it, it's one of those things where, I know that you and I both had the similar experience in school where if our English teachers from high school found out we are authors now, they probably would laugh their butts off, right? To go, what? We can sell anything to anybody probably in our high school, but I wasn't getting A+ in English composition, I can tell you that. And I was trying to bribe people to flip and write my papers, right? So it's that whole thing to go, so you might be like us and be worried, well, what if I'm not a good writer? Right? I mean, that might be part of your issue. Part of that could also be just because somebody said something to you once where you weren't a good writer. Maybe you got a C- on a paper, not because you're a bad writer, but because your English teacher was having a really bad day, right? I mean, it could very well be. Or it could very well be that you were a writer, but the context in which you wrote was different. So for me, like, I love to blog. I love to create content. But I'm not that great at writing research papers, right? So it's that whole thing of, like, most of what we did in high school and college was more around research. Now, I kind of sucked at that. So that was my context for writing. So it's one of those things where sometimes we worry about our performance. Are we really going to be able to pull this through? Sometimes we worry, again, about, I think, the technical aspects of this. There are a lot of moving parts to all of this. I heard kind of a comical interview recently where a podcaster was interviewing a author and talking about how great writing is because it creates such a passive income stream. And they were kind of saying, yeah, you just write and the money just starts to flow in. And I'm laughing because this author starts to walk through all the different things they do about building community, about the technical aspects of even picking effective categories. There's some technical aspects, and we can certainly get worried about those kinds of things too, right? Or it could very well be, again, that perception of how will it be received? Will it be a bestseller or will it be panned? Will people make fun of it? Will they not get it? All of those things. So, on the writing, there's a whole spectrum of things that we could worry about. Also kind of the cost. For some people, they're going to invest money. For other people, they're going to invest time. But to be able to say, is it going to be worth it? And so, again, to acknowledge some of those things and be able to say, yep, those are very real things, or at least very tangible things. Some might be more real than others, but to acknowledge them first. And the beautiful thing, especially when we talk about writing, is, and that's why I love what you do, because so many of the things that I think people worry about can actually be helped or overcome with training. With just a little bit of training, with a little bit of know-how, all of these things can be eradicated, eliminated, all those things, but they have to at first be acknowledged. And that's where I think most people, they get so caught up in the fear, they don't take that next step to say, I'm going to acknowledge them, and then I'm going to beat them with a stick. But you know what I mean? So that's what I love about what you're doing, is you're equipping people. But it first starts with saying, okay, what am I worrying about?
And how do you distinguish between good and bad worry? Because we talked about this idea of good worry versus bad worry.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. It's that whole thing of being able to say, some of it, good worry is, it's the very thing that keeps you out of alleys at night, dark alleys and those things are to be able to be aware of those things, but to also say, I always kind of just check myself. Like, I have I journal a lot, and there's a lot of chicken scratchings in there. And one of the things that I do is, if I'm feeling a lot of worry, and I'll feel worry, I'll be at least tempted to worry, around a book launch as an example. And so I'll just kind of make notes of those things that are making my heart race, and to be able to say, you know what? Okay. The other day we actually had a book launch in the area of coaching. And I can remember thinking like, oh gosh, my heart was racing a couple of different times. Right. And so I wrote down what were some of those things. And one of the things was totally about how well it was going to be received, you know? And so I was like, okay, that's kind of out of my control. But one of the other things was I was actually worried about something technically with Amazon. And so I wrote it down and thought, I don't know that I've asked my team about that. I don't know that we've talked about that. That is actually important to follow up on. So there are certain things you don't want to just dismiss them wholesale, but to write them down. And sometimes I always feel like, you know, by writing it down, it actually pulls it onto the radar. It's a little bit like flipping the light on when you were a little kid. We were always afraid of what was in the closet. But if you flip the light on, you know, you're able to see that it was just mom's fur coat or whatever. Or if there's a bad guy in there, at least you could acknowledge it, right? So it's that whole thing of being able to say, let's acknowledge it. And you know, again, it can start by just writing those things down, keeping it in one place. And so many of the people that I work with, whether it's speakers or writers or coaches, if they're creating content, just to even kind of keep that a little bit of a worry journal, just so they can acknowledge it and say, okay, is this something I really need to pay attention to? Or is it something that's totally out of my control that I have to replace?
And so once you acknowledge it, let's dive into step 2.
Yes.
You were kind of touching on earlier.
Absolutely. And what we talk about with, you have to replace it. You can't forget it. I mean, it's basically physically, mentally impossible to intentionally forget something. You have to replace it. So actually there's one of the stories that I tell on this front is I recognized this first when I was in high school and my psychology teacher came in the room. I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but we had a psychology teacher, great guy, but the epitome of the high school teacher in the 80s. He, you know, Sansa slacks, cardigan sweater with the leather patches on the elbows, a little bit of a spitting problem, you know? So if you're in the first couple of rows, you're getting wet, right? But he came in and said, class, we're going to do an experiment today. And, you know, which of course, in a high school psychology class is probably an opportunity to worry in and of itself. Right. But he said, today, we're going to do an experiment. And what I want everybody to do is forget about purple cows. He's like, put it out of your mind. Anything to do with purple cows, I want you to forget about it. And he systematically went through the room asking people, what were they thinking about? And as you can, what were they thinking about?
Purple cows.
Right. Because he's telling him, you got to forget. Like he pointed at Marty Griggs in the front row. He's like, he broke early. He was like bawling. I'm thinking about purple cows. Martin, I told you not to think about purple cows. All this kind of stuff. We were all thinking about purple cows until he got to Debbie in the back row, who had this huge smile on her face. He's like, Deborah, what are you thinking about? And she said, pink elephants. And he's like, excellent, Deborah. Right. And it was one of those, it was a great example where she had not forgotten about it. She'd replaced it. And I've found that that's what most people need to do. They can't dismiss it by trying to forget about it. Like it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. You have to ask yourself a better question, a question that overpowers that worry. So it's one of those things where my wife actually, you know, Melissa, I married up totally. But my wife a number of years ago had cancer, was diagnosed with cancer. And this played out in her life in a huge way in that, as you can imagine, anybody's listening to this, watching this, has had to deal with cancer. They know there's tons of different things that you can worry about when you've been diagnosed with cancer. And there's an amazing story that goes along with it. But really, we found out, and as we found out that day, we sat at a table together and we were crying and praying and thinking, and you know, our whole world kind of fell apart. And I can remember sitting there, and my wife, you know, we went from just being in that moment of just kind of sheer terror. All of a sudden, something overcame my wife, and she sat up and her shoulders dropped back and she got a big smile on her face, which I was like, uh-oh, she's gone nuts. She broke, you know, like what's going on? And she's like, no, I'm going to make it. And I'm like, okay, baby, that's awesome. She goes, no, I'm not just going to make it. I'm going to help people on the other side of this. I'm going to make it through, and I'm going to help people on the other side. And then she asked the question, she said, I wonder who I'm going to get to help. And that was, it was amazing. Right. So it was one of those things where like, I wasn't strong enough to be like with her in that moment. Like, I'm just like, holy crap. Right. Like that's amazing. But that question got her through a lot of dark times, you know, times when we'd get reports back that weren't so good, times at night when you just had to sit and think and wonder, where, you know, her imagination started to race. She started to say, wait, if I'm going to imagine things, I'm going to put it to good use. And so she said, I wonder who I'm going to help. And she started to think through, you know, who am I going to help? And she started to think about going to people's rooms in a hospital and sitting with people and talking with people and encouraging people and all of that. And I always say worry is simply unproductive imagination. It's unproductive imagination. So she chose to say, I'm going to make this productive. And so she's like, if I'm going to use my imagination, I'm going to make it productive. Now, she wasn't perfect at it. There was still some tears along the way, but she amazingly, we had a series of miracles that happened. And you can check out my blog for that. Just search my blog for the 6 miracle story and you can get the whole story on that. But I can tell you that question changed that whole process for her, that whole journey for her. And that's just a great example from the standpoint of when we worry about writing, you know, sometimes it's about to say, yeah, there, you know, you might be worried about somebody not liking it, and to say, yeah, some people might not like it, but who might need this right now? Who's that one person sitting there that needs this message? I got to get it to them. Right? I mean, who might need this message? Or another one might be, you know, for me, I can tell you when I went to go hit publish on Ignite, I got hit with a flood of worries again. You know, was it going to break? Was it going to hold up? Nobody's going to like this. All these kinds of things, all these temptations to worry. And the one that got me through that night when we hit publish was, what's this going to teach my kids? Whether it's a huge success or whether it goes down in fiery flames, what can my 2 boys learn from this? And that was what really pushed me through to hit publish, because I thought, you know what, either way, whether it goes great or whether it goes horribly, I can still say I tried, and I can still tell the story to my boys, and I can still walk them through that. And you know, so that was for me, that was the question that helped me replace those worries. I couldn't forget them. They were still readily apparent. But it was one of those where that was something that helped me to say, I got to do this anyway. Whether I worry or not, I got to do this because I want to teach my boys something, right? So it's that whole thing of, you can ask yourself a question and point that imagination towards something way more productive. And as you do that, the fight or flight will start to diminish. Your creative thinking will open up. You'll see more options, all of those things. So that first thing is to acknowledge it. The second is to replace it. And one of the best ways to replace it is to ask yourself a better question.
And so those are the questions that you used. Are there any other questions that come to mind here, or any other ways you can replace that worry? Or do you want to move into the next step?
Absolutely. So it's kind of one of those things where there's a number of other questions that when I work with authors, when I'm coaching authors, but also when I'm coaching speakers and all of that, is to be able to say, okay, you know, what's success look like? So often, you know, we don't know what success looks like. So it almost feels like we're, you know, shooting arrows into the dark, right? And it's interesting. My son, our youngest son, he's in training to be a samurai. Basically, he's a martial artist and he does competitive archery. But one of the first times that he went to competitive archery, like when he was in 5th grade, 6th grade, something like that, they had him in this huge room and they gave him a bow and arrow, but they didn't have targets. And I don't think they wanted to like hurt anybody's feelings or something like that, but they just let him, you know, take the bow as these big compound bows and they let him just shoot arrows at this big curtain, right? And he came home, and I think they wanted to encourage the kids, but he came home and he's like, that sucked. I was like, why? And he goes, well, we didn't know if we were good or not. We didn't know if it was working or not. You know, it's pretty astute for like a 5th grader, 6th grader, whatever he was. But I think for us as authors, whenever we're creating content, to be able to say, all right, what does success look like? And then to be able to say, what are some of the things that I can control as we go after that? So to be able to say, does success look like a New York Times bestseller? It certainly could, but what's maybe some success that could get you there? What are some successes that you could have on the short term to be able to get you there? What's success look like, maybe not a year from now, but what's success look like in 2 weeks? Well, it would be to have not only my mind map done, but my outline done. Or in 2 weeks, it's to be able to say, I'm going to have my outline done and I'm going to have those first 4 chapters done, right? Or roughed in, or whatever it is, starting to define those successes, because then your brain starts to work on what does success look like? And it starts to get caught up in that as opposed to just saying, okay, what am I worried about? Or what are those things that are distracting me? So one that I love is what does success look like? And then to put a time frame to that. What does success look like in a year? And once you start to clarify that, then to break that down and say, okay, well, what on my way there, what success looks like for the next 2 weeks? So that's a big one, just being able to ask that. One of the other things that I love to ask is, what can I control? What if this is this that I'm worried about? Can I control it, or can I influence it, or do I need to let it go? Right. And start kind of be able to think through, where is that for me? Is that something that's within my control? Great. I'll go after it. Is it something I can influence? Maybe it's something my team's doing or something the audience might do, right? I can do my best to influence it, but there's certain things like your ultimate results, you just kind of have to let go. And just to be able to be aware of those things, to be able to say, all right, that's in the let it go category. And maybe sing a couple of lines of Frozen and move on, right? It's that whole thing of being able to say, all right, I acknowledge, I just got to let it go. It's outside my control, outside my influence. I'm just going to let it go.
That's great. And that's such a great reframe to reshape from going to that worry to what success looked like, and then thinking about that.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and move on into step 3 of that?
Yeah. Step 3. Absolutely. So step 3 is just truly doing something intentionally. So often when we worry, we do stuff, but it's not the stuff we mean to do, or the stuff we should be doing, or the intentional stuff that we, that we can be doing. So when we worry, oftentimes we might react in a way. We might, spout off at somebody or be frustrated or whatever. We're going to react in a way that we don't want to. So that third step is just truly to pick an action, to be intentional about doing something. So, I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's true. And so oftentimes what that is that's actually kind of breaking it down to say, what are some of the things that I'm going to do? Now, I'll give you an example. So for me, we're all busy. You're busy. I'm busy, all that kind of thing. So one of the things that I worry about is having enough time, right? Having enough time. So one of the things is if I start to sense that, I'll say, okay, here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself 15. And I've got a list of different topics. Now, they might eventually become blog posts. They might eventually become parts of the chapters of a book. They might be for other content. But I have a list of things that I'm going to write on, and I give myself 15 minutes to just write, right? Just 15 minutes to riff on that content and get it down on paper. Now, what's kind of fun about that is that, you've probably done the math on this, but if so many people say, I don't have time, right, to do stuff. But if you actually write 5 days a week for 15 minutes a time, that's actually over a period of a year, that's 62 hours, right? That's 62 hours. That's a week and a half of most people's work week. And that's just writing, right? And what's amazing is that what's great I found with those 15 minutes is most people are like, oh, I don't have an hour to write. I don't have a half hour to write. Well, I've got my 15-minute list, and I can usually do that while I'm waiting for a meeting. Or I can do that while I'm waiting for somebody for a phone call. There's a ton of those 15-minute chunks that usually get eaten up by Facebook or Twitter or reading the paper or whatever. But I just said, okay, I'm going to just do that. And so it's interesting because just even having something you're going to do, an action that you can take immediately, that you don't have to do a lot of thinking in the meantime, but just taking an action. It's amazing. I'll get on the other side of that and go, that's really good. Or to be able to say, gosh, I worked that muscle, or I hadn't really thought through that. So just having some things close at hand so that you can take action right away is really, really helpful. So it's simple things like that. But it's also, I always like to say, all right, what are some other kind of hacks? What are some other things that you can do as you're kind of taking that intentional step? And I know one of the things that when I talk with people about kind of creating content or writing or that kind of thing, one of the things they worry about is not having enough time to research, not having enough time to kind of become an expert, not having enough time to really get familiar with the content. And for me, I wrestle with that same thing. I totally understand. Plus, I'm not much of an actual reader, right? I enjoy it, but I have a short attention span. I've got like adult onset ADHD. I'm all over the place, right? So it's that whole thing of sitting down and reading I enjoy. But the times where I could just sit for a half hour or an hour and just read, I'd like it to be more often than it is, but it's just not that common. So a hack that I've found that kind of falls into that, again, taking some intentional steps, is I love grabbing a book. Maybe I found an author that I like. I like to grab a book And what I'll do is I'll give myself permission to just skim it. Like, take a look at the table of contents, see what pops out at me, all those things, and then I skim it, right? And I take some notes as I do that, but I do that in those 15-minute chunks too. I just take a look through, maybe skim a chapter, grab some of those things. Some of those things will jump off the page. But the other part of this that's kind of one of my favorite hacks is that I've been doing lately is I will actually take that author and either give myself permission for 1 week or 2 weeks. I don't know if we talked about this, but 1 week or 2 week. And all I do is listen to podcast interviews with that author. Because what's interesting is that most authors are doing, what you recommend, right? You not only write the book, but you promote the shiznits out of it, right? And one of the ways you promote the shiznits out of it is you get on interviews, get interviews and podcasts, right? And what I've found is if you do that, and I'm more of an auditory learner anyway, so I love to hear people talk through their ideas. What I found is most authors that are out there worth their snuff, as long as they're still alive. This does not apply so well with Napoleon Hill as an example. I'm so sorry. You can get some recordings. He's not doing a lot of podcasts right now. But with those authors who are living it and kicking it, right? They're out there doing podcasts. And what I've found is if I'm working out in the morning, I'm listening to a podcast of my featured author for that week or whatever, and I'm hearing them. And a lot of times they might use some of the same stories, some of the same concepts, but in those podcasts, they really boil down some of their most important lessons, right? Some of the biggest takeaways from the book, you're going to hear those in those interviews. And over the time of that week or 2 weeks, I maybe have read maybe an hour over the course of 2 weeks, but I've heard them and I've heard their concepts. And so that those concepts now become, instead of sprayed on in me, they're baked in, right? So it's those things where I've taken something that was a worry, and now at the end of 2 weeks, I'm feeling pretty confident and pretty competent in that subject, especially related to that particular author. So it's that whole thing of acknowledging, I'm worried I don't have enough time. Yep, you're acknowledging it. Let's call that out, saying, what can I do to actually overcome that? And then 3, do something like a hack like that to be able to say, I'm going to pour into that. And at the end of 2 weeks, instead of having 2 weeks where I was just worried and didn't take any action, at the end of 2 weeks, I'm actually feeling pretty competent and confident in a particular area, especially related to a specific author. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I love that hack. I'm definitely going to start using that. Appreciate sharing that. What are some
Absolutely.
other, like, now that we've went through the 3 ways to punch worry in the face?
Yeah.
We've gotten through that. Okay, so we were worried about writing a book. Now we're on the way out. We're not totally out of the woods yet,
right,
but we're coming out of the woods. What are some other hacks and other things that people can use, like some strategies, tips, tactics, just like you were just talking about?
Absolutely. So one of the things on that front is, and this is really an important thing. It's subtle, but it's an important thing, especially if somebody's a lifelong worrier. Like I am. I mean, I'm black belt level worrier, right? Like I've been doing this for a long time. And it's one of those things to realize that as you start to go after this, whether it's going after it so you can create more content or going after worry because you just want it to get out of your life, one of the first things to recognize is there's a difference between worrying and being tempted to worry. Now that sounds a little weird maybe, but I think for some people, as they start to beat back worry with a stick, right? When they start to punch worry in the face, maybe they get a little taste of like, okay, it hit me, but it wasn't so bad. I'm overcoming this. But then all of a sudden that worry hits them like a Mack truck, right? And they're like, crap, I guess I don't have it beat. And so they can kind of be set back for a while. First off is to recognize that being tempted to worry is different than worry itself. So as an example, as I was getting ready to hit publish for Ignite, I got hit with a lot of temptation to worry, right? And what I did was, instead of worrying, which then worry takes you off track, worry shuts you down, worry makes you grumpy, it gets you your grumpy pants on, right? You can't do anything, you can't work with people, all of that stuff, right? That's full scale worry. But being tempted to worry is good, and it's one of those things to recognize, okay, what am I tempted to worry about? And so realizing that the temptation to worry, that could just be your body, your mind being aware of some things you have to pay attention to. Now, one of them was just acknowledging, yeah, it could go down in fiery flames, or yeah, some people might not like it, or maybe nobody will like it. To acknowledge that and say, okay, that goes in the out of my control, let it go bucket, right? but there was certain things to be able to say, I need to pay attention to that categories discussion. We need to follow up on that. So to recognize the temptation to worry is not necessarily a bad thing. You need to acknowledge that and catch it before it moves into full scale worry. But a lot of people, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so what are you saying, that like the temptation to worry is almost like a sign that you're onto something that you should, that needs to be done, and it's almost like a precursor to doing something great?
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's funny. I was actually getting ready to do a workshop on worry and posted on Facebook the night before. Hey, it's ironic. Here I am getting ready to do a workshop on worry, and I'm tempted to worry. Right. And, but I addressed some of those things, just like you said, they were signals that I needed to think through. One of the things was I needed to think through a prop I was going to use. And one of the things that I needed to double check on the AV in the room. I had not checked on that yet, all those things. Right. But the next morning I get to this seminar and the room's full, but a woman comes up to me and she's like, she looks scared. And I'm like, are you okay? And she goes, well, you might not know it, but we're friends on Facebook. And I was like, oh yeah, no, that's great. And she goes, are you okay? And I'm like, why? What? And she said, well, you said you were tempted to be worried last night. You were tempted to worry. Are you okay? I was worried about you all night. And I'm like, oh, no, I slept like a baby. I said, but that's the difference between being tempted to worry and going into full scale worry. So as an author, as a writer, right, sometimes to acknowledge like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit of worry, or to realize, oh, I'm feeling a little stress, and just go, okay, to acknowledge that, saying, what is that? Is it, are you worried it's going to be well received? Well, maybe it's replacing it with, what's just one person? What if just one person got helped with this point? Or if you're worried about, again, some of the technical aspects, who's somebody I could talk with tomorrow about that? Or I'm going to dig into Chandler's course just a little bit deeper and go after that, because I know there's something in there. So, and you just write it down so you don't forget it. But then you can say, all right, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm going to get back to writing. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And that's a great story. I love that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
so
the fact that you slept like a baby.
Yeah, I did. Slept like a baby. So, and it's huge. And I think one of the other things too, and this goes with anything that you're talking about, whether it's worry or whether it's just being more creative, or, even monetizing, whatever, whatever stage you're at, wherever you're thinking about it. I think one of the other really important hacks, which is not really a hack at all, it's more of a life lesson, but it's that whole thing of grace, right? None of us are going to do this perfect. None of us are going to do this perfect right out of the gate, and none of us are going to do it perfect on a regular basis. But Chandler, you know me, I got a lot of issues. But one of the other issues I've got is I'm a recovering perfectionist, right? So I got a little issue with worry, and I deal with perfectionism. And one of the challenges with perfectionism and writing is that so often we kind of get this sense of what writing's going to look like, what it needs to feel like, all those things, the goals that we have, the things that we want to do. And if it doesn't go exactly as we thought, right, or we misstep, or we don't get that session in like we'd hoped, or we get super distracted, all that stuff, then we kind of allow ourselves to just completely go off the rails, right? That one thing didn't work, so that's almost full scale permission to just bail, right? It's never going to work. But to be able to say grace is important, to say, okay, I acknowledge I gaffed that, or I acknowledge that did not go as well as I hoped, but I'm going to give myself grace for the day, and I'll start fresh tomorrow. So, I mean, it might sound trite, but I know, especially for a recovering perfectionist, I've seen so many perfectionists just be right on track for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then they have 2 or 3 days where it just doesn't work, or, they go back to old habits or whatever. And inside, probably more of a subconscious level than a conscious level, they're like, it just didn't work, right? It wasn't meant to happen. I thought I had it, but I didn't, right? And they're willing to just kind of throw it away. And I always say, if you can give yourself some grace, that allows you to get back on track and get back to it. And that's, to me, that's huge. It's one of those where almost every author that I've ever talked with, every successful author, there was multiple times where they either were ready to chuck it, thought they should chuck it, never thought that it was going to see the light of day, were happy about that, all that stuff. And whether they used that word or not, grace was a part of getting them back on track, giving himself that permission to just have a little bit of grace to say, okay, it doesn't have to be done it doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be done. But to be able to say, all right, that goes with the product, but that also goes with the process.
Yeah, I love that you touched on that, because that's something we talk about all the time in self-publishing school. The motto, our kind of motto is done is better than perfect.
Right.
And so I think that's a great takeaway. And then also what you were just saying there of kind of overthrowing your inner critic, that your inner critic is that voice that keeps coming up. And each time any little hiccup comes that keeps you from being perfect, you say, knew it. And maybe that might not even be your inner critic. That might be outer critics. Like,
right.
For a lot of people, I think we should acknowledge the fact that, like, I know people even in our course who they said, yeah, my family told me I shouldn't sign up for this. They told me that it was a bad decision, that this was a ripoff, that you guys were just going to take my money, you know, like all these things. And then those are the same people who throughout the process say, yeah, I told you couldn't write a book. Yep. You didn't hit your writing goal. Like, I
told you. Yep,
exactly. And so that's why it's so important not only to surround yourself with people that can encourage you, but to be able to defeat both your inner critic and the outer critics.
So true. Big time.
And so when we're talking about that, do you do that by punching worry in the face? Or like, how do you truly defeat? Because that's the tough part. Like, I've always had really supportive family. So it's kind of, it's tough for me to understand sometimes when, like, there were literally students where they said, like, my whole family is against this. Not only like not for it, they're against it. It's like, how do you deal with that?
They're thinking about putting me away because of this, right? I mean, absolutely. And that's one of those things where, you know, that's another part of when we talk about being intentional with your, you know, to break through and punch worry in the face is, to your point, you can't do that alone. And a lot of times, you know, when we were growing up, you know, what is it? You can pick your friends and you can pick your friend's nose, but you can't pick your family, right? So it's that whole thing of being able to say, okay, a lot of times that the critics can either be your friends or your family. And I love to think, you know, we talk a little bit about that even in our coach training course, that a lot of times when people are in that mode, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And hopefully at the heart of that, they're just trying to protect you, right? They're trying to protect you from something going bad. They're trying to hopefully protect you from you know, looking silly or whatever their perception is that they're trying to protect you from. But we also know that sometimes when you go and pursue a dream, that makes other people uncomfortable because they have to acknowledge maybe they're not pursuing their dream. And anytime somebody says, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to write a book? Who do you think you are to help someone else? Who do you think you are to go and be a speaker? Whatever it is, whenever they're saying that, it's usually because inside they're struggling with exactly who they are, right? And by the fact you moving forward makes them really uncomfortable. So I love to think, or at least give those people the benefit of the doubt, that they're probably trying to keep you safe. You know, it's a little bit like when my boys climb trees, right? There's a part of me that goes, yeah, get up higher, go. You know, and there's a part of me that's like, do not take another step. I don't want to take you to the ER. All that stuff, right? So there's a little bit of that, hopefully, that they're just trying to keep you safe. So it starts there to maybe even give them a little bit of grace or whatever. So at the same time, we don't know what their intentions might be. The thing about being intentional, though, is you can't always pick your family and you can't always pick your initial friends. But, you know, whether you're 13 or 35 or 73, you can be intentional about who you surround yourself with now, as of today, and to start that process. And I know for me, there are certain things in my life where I have an amazing wife. I did marry up. So you know her, so you know it's true. And so she's incredibly supportive. I also have a mastermind group that I meet with on a regular basis. They are the first ones to push me. They are the first ones, if I'm feeling down or if I'm getting overtaken by those worries or whatever, they're the first ones to hold my feet to the fire and push me, you know, and all those things. And that didn't come fast. That came slow. That came from building relationships and finding a couple of people who were ripping it up in their industries, and, you know, just being able to meet with them and support them and do that for them as well. And then I've got a couple other really great friends. Well, and you and I meet on a regular basis, pushing each other and all that stuff, having those uncomfortable conversations, not that you suck or who do you think you are, but it's like, yo, you got to get it done, all those kinds of things. So being intentional with surrounding yourself. And that's where I also love, self-publishing school from that standpoint of you guys do create community. And, 20 years ago, it'd be really hard to, create community with somebody living on the other side of the country. And there is something about going and being able to break bread with somebody, but, I know that there are people within self-publishing school that are setting up those like mini, mastermind groups and pushing each other because they just don't have it locally. And so that's one of the big things I always say is, you can't eliminate all the jackweeds in your life. You can't eliminate, some of those people are blood and they're going to be at every family dinner, and that's just fine. But if you've got a couple of core people that they're pushing you, but you're also pushing them and supporting them, and it's a two-way street, it makes all the difference. You can sit with a big old goofy grin on your face, amid maybe some of that criticism, because you got some people out there that got your back. And usually the way that relationship starts is by you having somebody else's back. So start, especially if you're like, yeah, but I don't have that. Well, start doing that for others. See who responds well to it. Start building relationships with them.
And I love that as part of the underlying message to one of the things you said is don't refine your circle of influence that's influencing you to your zip code. I think that was one of the first big realizations. Like I was in high school and thought, I can't relate to a lot of people, but I can't do anything about it. Then I got to college and my sphere was expanded. But even then we met at the Succeed Faster conference, and it was stuff like that where I was like, okay, now I have friends all around the world, all around the US that I can go to. And it was expanding from that to be like, okay, I can't just limit myself to the people that are directly in front of me, whether it's my school, my work environment, my college, my town, whatever that might be. It's okay. And it's perfectly normal if you're going for something great to look outside of that.
Absolutely. And I think you're probably one of the epitome examples, like the great examples of this, because we look back to even the genesis of you and I meeting, right? I spoke at a conference, you attended that conference, you came out, you're obviously a standout within that audience, but your first questions weren't, what can you do for me? Your first questions were, what can I do for you? Plus, I got home and within days of being home, I had this goofy thank you note with your picture stamped on it, which made me just laugh out loud, right? But it was specific feedback and encouragement for me. And that's what most people don't think, is most people don't think somebody out there needs encouragement, but everybody needs encouragement. And you offered that first, right? You didn't say, what can you do for me? You offered that encouragement first. You offered to help first. And I think there's so many people out there who are like, I would love to have a mastermind group, but there's nobody here to help me. But I think to your point, it's that don't limit yourself to your zip code, but also don't limit yourself to those who just offer to help you. Find some of those people that are rock stars, reach out to them and offer them in a true and authentic way to help them. And just see where that takes you. I mean, you do have some of the most amazing relationships because one, you're audacious and you reach out to people, but two, you reach out in a way that says, I'm here to help. I mean, you've gotten into conferences because you've offered to seat people, clean up, all these kinds of, it's crazy what you're willing to do, but what that does is that creates a two-way relationship almost immediately. And again, you've made that a reality. I love that.
Well, I appreciate it, man. You're making me blush over here.
Oh, that's true. Good. Yeah. Glad this is an HD.
Yeah, that's a real good thing. I can see my face getting bright red. Mitch, this has been great. Before we wrap, I want to touch on a couple things. First, I want to recap 3 steps. Punching worry in the face.
Punch worry in the face. 1, identify it. Call it out. To your point, sometimes it's really good to acknowledge those things. It's not all worry is not all bad. So to recognize, what am I worrying about? To recognize it by even simply writing it down, kind of making yourself aware of it. Some of it you might need to acknowledge because you need to do something about it. But oftentimes you need to acknowledge it so you let it go. So the first step is to acknowledge it. Second step is to replace it. It's impossible to forget about something, but it is possible to replace it. And usually one of the best ways to replace something is to ask yourself a better question. Point that point that imagination towards something that's going to help you as opposed to something that's going to set you back. And then what's also important is that third step of getting it out of your head and then doing something intentionally. So first it's shifting your thinking by replacing it, but then it's taking action in an intentional way. And a lot of times it's good to have a short list of different actions you could take that help you to shift that state of mind, that state of thinking, that state of awareness. So you're taking action in a way that you want to be taking action, and in a way, especially in this context, that helps you to get that book done and out to the world.
Got it. And last thing, final parting tip for someone who's just in the grips of worry and they're thinking about writing their book, but they're just so dang worried about it that they can't even imagine doing it.
Absolutely. Well, in some ways this might seem crazy, but one of my last tips, and we have a coaching program. We train life coaches and business coaches. And a lot of times what I'll say is take whatever's worrying you, acknowledge it, and then that could very well be the genesis of what you need to be teaching on. Right? I mean, it's really interesting for authors, for coaches, for speakers. You know, I don't think this applies to plumbers. I don't think this applies to CPAs necessarily, but it's very often the battles that we face as content developers, right? As authors, as coaches, as speakers, it's very often the battles that we face become the very things that we teach on. The very lessons that we break through turn out to be the very things that wind up being a blessing to other people. So take note of it, and not only take note of it, but punch it in the face so that you can then share that and overcome share your stories of overcoming it with others. You don't have to do it perfectly. It's just, you have to be in that process. And it's very often, it's amazing how people will do that, to go, you know what, I had to push through this worry. I had to push through this battle in order to then get to the people that I was put on the planet to help. So, don't dismiss them from that standpoint of being able to say, well, that could very well be the thing I need to be teaching other people to help overcome.
That's a great, great, great parting tip. And almost like I think it was Malcolm Gladwell or something like that, who it was a different version of that.
Yeah.
Where it was like not so much what he's worried about, but I think it was him who he said he writes books based on what he wants to learn about. Yep. So that conflict, or that overcomes a totally different worry, right? People worry about, I don't know enough about it. And I'm pretty sure it was him who he said,
I wouldn't be surprised.
I pick stuff that I know nothing about and want to know about. And then I learn everything I can about that to create a book. So I use the book as an excuse to learn a lot about that thing.
That's perfect.
Those are some great parting tips. And Mitch, this has been really, really good. I know that I'm sure there's a lot of warriors out there, and there's tons of doubts and fears and worries spinning around writing our first book. So this has been a great kickoff. And before we go here, where can people find out more info and get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I'd love for people to come and visit me, connect with me. The easiest way to do it is find me at mitchmatthews.com, MITCHMATTHEWS. So we're a 2T Matthews family, although we've got some 1Ters in our family as well. So call me crazy.
2T Matthews.
But we won't go there. But again, mitchmatthews.com. You can find out about our podcast. I also invite people to really check that out. Dream, Think, Do. We're at the top of the iTunes charts. We do a lot of interviews and a lot of deep dives on subjects such as this to help people dream bigger, think better, and do more of the crazy cool stuff you were put on the planet to do. So please check us out there. I would love to have you be a part of the Dream, Think, Do family as well.
Absolutely. And highly recommend you check out mitchmatthews.com. Dream, Think, Do podcast as well. And there's one specific episode I think people watching this would really be interested in, and that's the Brendan Burchard episode. Because he talks about the behind the scenes of his book, working with a publisher. This is someone who doesn't do a lot of interviews, and because Mitch rocks so much and he loves Mitch, he did one on his podcast. It's a really great interview. Highly recommend you checking that out. And
that one's amazing. And sorry to interrupt, but it is. He shared something on there he didn't share in any of the other interviews, and it was basically all about returning a monster check to a publisher because they wanted to totally change a book he was working on. And it's an amazing story. I didn't know he'd be able to tell it on the podcast, but listen in to the very end and that story will blow you away.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure people will definitely check that out. Mitch, you're the man. Always a pleasure coming and talking with you and learning from you. And you're a great guy. So really appreciate you coming on here. And I hope everyone goes and checks out your stuff.